everything. So many of us, why is so important for us to keep checking our Iman? Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, Al-Imanu yanqusu wa yazdadu. Allahu Akbar. Iman is something that increases and decreases according to the time, according to the need, and according to the situation you are in. Some of the times, and you must have realized yourself, when you're sitting on your own sofa, couch, watching the TV, that's the moment where your Iman goes down. But when you come to the masjid, you pick up the Quran al-Kareem, start reading the Quran al-Kareem, this is the moment when your Iman is going to increase, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And that's the meaning of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he says, Al-Imanu yanqusu wa yazdadu. Iman is something which is going to keep changing according to the situation. And one of the most amazing things which Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu ta'ala, he was asked about, one of the young brother asked Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu, and this is for the youth, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, because this event is mainly for youth, for them to realize, for them to understand the importance of deen, how important for us to be proud of being Muslim, how important it is for us to be identified as a Muslim. Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu anhu was asked, and this is one of the ayah from the Quran al-Kareem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentioned in the Quran, and Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu ta'ala was asked how to increase our Iman, and what's the best way, especially for the youngsters, what's the best way to keep our Iman increasing and going up and up? Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali, when he was asked about this, Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali radiyallahu ta'ala, he says one of the most beautiful way of increasing your Iman, preserving your Iman, to be in the environment where Allah is mentioned. Don't go to those houses where Allah is never mentioned. Don't hang out with those people who never mention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, you're going to be with those who hang out with. And in another hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, your accountability in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be with those who you hang out with. So now you have to decide, what kind of accountability do you want? Do you want Allah to be happy with you, or do you want Allah to be unhappy with you? That's Sayyidina Imam Al-Ghazali, he says, you have to be very careful who you hang out with, because your friend is going to have an impact on you. And there is a time which is going to come in your life, despite you being very firm on your belief and your aqidah, on your Iman, if you have a people who don't remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all, and you try to hang out with them, ultimately one day is going to come into your life, you're going to keep losing your Iman. Or you're going to have some doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what happens these days. So many of us, we might have realized in our own families, एक ऐसा बंदा जिसके पास पूरा ईमान था. Somebody was firm on his aqidah. Somebody was firm on his Iman and faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But day by day, he started hanging out with those who never mentioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or those who were mu'min or Muslim by the names. Even though their name was Abdullah, but they never were Abdullah. And one thing I would like to mention here, and this is very important. One of the great Imam Al-Zahabi, when he was about to explain the Iman, what Iman is, he mentioned two things about Iman. He said there are two types of Iman, two categories of Iman. He says the very first one is Iman al-Tahqiqi. Iman al-Tahqiqi means like to know about the pillars of Islam, and not only to know about, to be firm on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all the aqaid of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. For example, we believe that آمنت بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره من الله تعالى والبعث بعد الموت. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Iman al-Tahqiqi means that you have Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only that you have Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have verified your Iman and you are good enough to provide proofs to others about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Iman al-Tahqiqi. And once you have Iman al-Tahqiqi, your Iman is safe. Your Iman is safe, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala. Once you have reached to the maqam of Iman al-Tahqiqi, once you have verified your Iman, once you have made sure that you you are in the mahfil, in the company of those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then your iman is safe. Another thing, and majority of us, especially in our families, we don't have iman al-tahqiqi, we have iman al-taqlidi. What does iman al-taqlidi mean? Iman al-taqlidi means somebody who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, somebody who believes in the malaika, the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the anbiya karam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the prophets alayhi salatu wa salam, but is never sure about. For so many of us, we never really worked hard for iman, for Islam. If I was to ask you, any one of you, what made you Muslim? For example, if I ask Hamad, what made you Muslim? Answer is going to be, because my dad was Muslim, so I became Muslim. You know what I mean? That's for most of us, because we never really thought about why I'm a mu'min, why I'm a Muslim, what made me Musliman, what made me to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the moment you start questioning yourself, and you reach it to the maqam al-tahqiqi, and one of the great imam, he says, how to define somebody has a right iman. Allahu Akbar. One of the great imam, Imam Shabi, he says, somebody asked him, how to define that I have the greatest iman? Then he says, when everything you can relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have reached the maqam al-tahqiqi, or iman al-tahqiqi. For example, nowadays, if you read any of the books, this is the educational system these days. Earlier, like 500 years ago, when we used to read the books of, for example, chemistry or anything, we used to read any of the books. For example, if we want to go deeper about flowers, फूलों के बारे में, अहलुल्लाह की ज़ुबान कैसी होती है, and those who have firm iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how they describe the flowers, and those who are away from deen, how they describe flowers. एक फूल है और उसको बयान करने का अंदाज आप देखें, उस अंदाज से पता चलेगा कि बंदे का अल्लाह पे यकीन कितना है. Allahu Akbar. Imam Shabi, he says, somebody who has reached to iman al-tahqiqi, when somebody asks him, or somebody tells him, asks him about the flowers, he says, what a beautifully created flowers. कि कितने प्यारे अंदाज में इन flowers को बनाया गया है. When somebody mentions creates, your zahn is going to go towards creator. आप देखें, एक ही चीज है, flowers है. If you say what a beautiful flower, your zahn is not going to go to the creator. But when you say what a beautifully created flowers, then your zahn is going to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what Allah wants to all of us. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, if you read Surah Al-Mursalat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is a nishani of Allah, signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere. Look at the earth, and whatever there on earth, everything is going to relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything is going to tell you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All you need to do, you need to reflect about. You need to ponder about. And that's the iman al-tahqiqi. When somebody has an iman al-tahqiqi, then there is no harm for them. Nothing is going to have impact on them, inshallah ta'ala. And there is a guarantee that they're going to leave this dunya in the state of iman, inshallah ta'ala. But majority of us, we have iman al-taqlid. I'm a Muslim because my father was a Muslim. I never really thought. My name is Abdullah. Why? Because my father named me Abdullah. What have you done to be Abdullah? Abdullah means being the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have you ever tried to be the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allahu Akbar. So Sayyidina Imam al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala, when he was asked about that, how to boost our iman and how to keep our iman safe, the very first thing he mentions that, especially for the youngsters, for the youth, look who you hang out with. And another thing, Imam al-Ghazali, he says, you tell me about your jalasa and I will tell you about your character. Allahu Akbar. Jalasa means like your havari, those you hang out with. He says, you tell me about your friends and I will tell you what kind of person you are. Allahu Akbar. क्योंकि आपके साथियों का, आपके दोस्तों का आपकी जिंदगी पे असर होता है. And we have seen that. If there is anyone who says, I don't believe in that, then he is a jhutha. Because we have seen so many examples. Somebody having a good firm aqidah and firm iman and yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite having all of these things. लेकिन क्या हुआ? दूसरी मसाजिद में जाने लगे, दूसरे लोगों से मिलने लगे, and slowly they left the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very important for us to be with those who mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, dhikrullah is something which is going to preserve your iman, and the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something which is going to boost your iman, inshallah ta'ala. And this is the definition and tafsir of this ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهِ, and this one part of the ayah. The next part of ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. Allahu Akbar. So where Allah's zikr is mentioned, where Allah is mentioned, the believers, they always fearful. They fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most when Allah is reminded by them, or someone mentions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, He says, وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned to them, or when the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, when the verses from Quran, from the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam are mentioned to them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا, that increases their iman, that boosts their iman. And that's why one of the great hadiths of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has mentioned, what a beautiful hadith for all of us. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He says, keep checking your iman and the level of your iman, because your iman sometimes going to increase and your iman sometimes going to decrease. So Sahaba asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when our iman is going to increase and where our iman is going to decrease, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then He recited this ayah. And He says, make sure you are in those mahafil, in those gatherings where Allah is mentioned. Because the moment you mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the moment you do anything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is going to increase your level of iman, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Another hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He told one of great Sahabi, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma. And Abdullah ibn Abbas was quite young at that time. In those days, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, he was very young. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He says to Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, oh young man, let me tell you one hadith. He says to Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, oh young man, let me tell you one hadith. The very first thing he says, ihfadillah yahfadak. Allahu Akbar. What a beautiful narration from Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for all of us. Some of the times you find it really hard to be firm on deen. Some of the times we think, oh, it's hard to be mu'min, it's hard to be Muslim. I have to pray, I have to wake up early in the morning. And for so many of us, it's so hard. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He says, ihfadillah yahfadak. You be mindful about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is going to protect you, inshallah. Allahu Akbar. Aap dekhen ki Allah ne is baat ka zimma le liya. The moment you are mindful about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the moment you think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the moment you have put in your mind that there is someone 24/7 who's watching me, monitoring me 24/7, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, all you have to do, put into your mind that you're never alone. You know, so many of us, especially our youth, younger generation these days, when they want to commit sins, they want to hide it from everyone. They don't want to be exposed. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, keep in your mind, just put in your dimagh that Allah is watching you 24/7. Be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah is going to take care of the rest of the things, inshallah. And another hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for us to protect our iman, to be in the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He says, Man salla subha فهو في ذمة الله كما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Somebody who prays Fajr namaz, he is in the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. It's hard for us to pray Fajr namaz these days because Isha is quite late and Fajr is quite early. And one thing I would like to highlight here, you know, when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not look at the rakat, how many units of salah you have done. When it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not look at all of these things. And that's why very soon we're going to be in the month of Qurbani. When it comes to Qurbani, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? He says, لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. That the blood, the flesh, nothing goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we do Qurbani, no, imagine for a moment you sacrifice something and you're going to eat it yourself. But you say, I have sacrificed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I don't need all of these things. Uska gosht, uska khoon, nothing goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your effort, is your sincerity, is your intention, is your taqwa. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Man salla subha fa huwa fi dhimmatillah. For so many of us who finds it really hard to be on a sirat al-mustaqim, on the right path, I guarantee you, for 40 days, just don't miss your fajr namaz, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. No matter how hard shaitan try to put you back, no matter how hard shaitan try to misguide you, to mislead you, you will never be misguided, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Because that's a guarantee from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Man salla subha fa huwa fi dhimmatillah. That somebody who prays fajr namaz, and he puts effort into fajr namaz. You know, two types of namaz. One type of namaz is like when you pray salah just to get rid of salah. You know, oh, I have to do it. And that's why the great Allama, they say when you pray your salah, and that's hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked about al-ihsan. What's al-ihsan? What's al-ihsan? Mal ihsanu ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, ihsan is like you pray your salah in a state that you could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine about, you are there to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or you're being told by someone, the moment you pray your salah, you're going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How would you feel? कहते हैं कि कल क़यामत के दिन उम्मत रसूल सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को जो अजीम अजीम चीज़ें दी जाएंगी, उसमें सबसे अजीम अल्लाह के जलवों का दीदार होगा. To be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the jalwa, the tajalli of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the same tajalli which was shown to Sayyidina Musa the Nabi alayhi salatu wa salam. Same tajalli you could see every single day the moment you pray your salah. But all you have to do to put effort into your salah. You have to put effort in your salah. And that's al-ihsan mean. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says to pray your salah in a state that you could see Allah subhanahu, put effort in your salah. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, if anyone who prays fajr namaz for 40 days, despite having all hardship, I know it's hard. It's hard after Isha, when you go back to sleep, you have to wake up early. But try this for 40 days, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala. No matter how hard shaitan tries, even the dunya is against you, you will be protected, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, because that's something guaranteed from the Quran and the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's something which have come from the beautiful of our Nabi sallallahu, beautiful lips of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the moment somebody puts effort towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Inna Allah la yudhi'u ajra al-muhsinin. Allah does not waste the reward, the effort of those who are excellence towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Put effort in your salah. So the very first thing Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, al-ihsan means to be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you can't find that situation, or you can't get into that state, then Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, pray your salah in a way that Allah is watching you. Imagine when Allah is watching you, are you going to look here and there? No. And we have seen so many of the people coming to the masjid, they're not well dressed up. You're coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to be well dressed up. For example, if you want to go to somebody who is minister or anything, 15 दिन पहले लोग कपड़े अपने आयन करना शुरू कर देते हैं. They're going to go for the youngsters, okay? They will go to JD, buy the really nice tracksuits and, you know, shoes and everything, and trainers and everything. They want to be looking well dressed up, you know, tip top and everything, mashallah. But imagine about Allah subhanahu, you're going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So many of us, हमने देखा है कि वो काम करते हैं, उन्हीं काम वाले कपड़ों में आकर के नमाज पढ़ते हैं. Namaz is valid, but where is your effort? What kind of effort you have put towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's not about the units, the rakat that you have prayed. It's about your effort that you have put in salah. And that's why Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, Man salla al-burdayn fahuwa fi dhimmatillah. Or kama qala Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That somebody who prays Fajr namaz and Isha namaz, he is always going to be in the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sahaba ask, Ya Rasulullah, what's the reason? Why you specifically mention these two namaz? Because these are the only two namaz which is quite hard. And especially we can understand the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in this day and age. Now when you have to wake up, or when you have to wait till 11 o'clock to pray your Isha namaz, and then again 4 o'clock you have to get up. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says somebody who makes sure to pray Isha and Fajr for 40 days, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, they will see the results in their life, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And they can never be misguided. So one of the most beautiful way to preserve your Iman, to guide your Iman, to guard your Iman, is to pray your Fajr and your Isha, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Start praying Fajr and Isha. And when I say pray your Salah, make sure you make best of the effort to pray your Salah. Not just like, oh, I have my wuzu. Not sure, but I have my wuzu, but I will just do my namaz. आप देखें यही वजह है कि al-wuzu al-wuzu. When you have your wuzu, but still you do wuzu, that's kind of putting effort in your salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He loves that. And that's the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The most beautiful faces, the brightest faces on the day of judgment are going to be those who used to do wuzu al-wuzu in this dunya. And those who used to make effort to their namaz, कि wuzu होने के बावजूद वो wuzu किया करते थे. क्यों? क्यों अल्लाह की तरफ वो effort डालना चाहते थे. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, on the day of judgment, they are going to be known by the beautiful and bright faces, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, He has mentioned some of the tips in order to preserve our Iman, boost our Iman, increase our Iman. Some of the things Allah's Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which He has mentioned, He says, there are certain Eids for believers. And when I say Eid, I'm not talking about the Eidain that we have, Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. And if you really go about the great awliyaullah, those who were very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were never bothered about Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Fitr. They never bothered about. For them the Eid is what the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says that certain Eids for the believers. Look at these Eid, mashallah. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says there are 5 spiritual Eids for believers, for Muslims. The very first one, the day in which the person does not commit any sin. Allahu Akbar. But what we have seen, despite having fasting in the month of Ramadan al-Kareem on the Eid day, the Eid al-Fitr is the day when we commit the most of the jara'im, the most of the crimes, the most of the sins. But Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says the day of Eid for mu'min, for believer, is the day when he does not commit any sin. When he did not miss any of the salah. When he did not look at something which is haram in the sharia. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says the day you don't commit any sin, take that day at Eid, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala. So that's the very first Eid for believer. And always make sure not to go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, the day in which the person did not give up his Iman to shaitan while leaving this dunya. And that's why one of the great shair, which I always recite, when it was time for one of the great Imam from subcontinent, Imam al-Kafi, he was a great fighter. When it was his time to leave this dunya, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says the greatest Eid for the believer is the day when he is going to leave this dunya and he did not give up his Iman to shaitan. He did not give his Iman to shaitan. And one of the great Imam, he says, Aaj phule na samayengi qabr mein aasi. When he knew that this night could be his last night, or this moment could be his last moment, he says, I'm over the moon today. Imagine about someone, आज हम मरते हैं, मरने वाला रोता है, और उसके घर वाले भी रोते हैं. But Imam al-Kafi, he says, I'm over the moon today, because I have known, and I know that I have lived all my life with the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, I got victory over shaitan. And today is the day which is as an Eid for me, because I did not give my Iman to shaitan. And according to the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the day when somebody leaves this dunya and he did not give his iman to shaitan, even at the time of death, then Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, that day is a Eid for them. And Imam al-Kafi, he says, aaj phoole na samayenge kabar mein aasi ki shab-e gaur hai us gul se mulaqat ki raat. So these are the individuals. Some more hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and simply we're going to finish inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, the day in which the person can pass Sirat al-Mustaqim easily. Our Eid is going to be when you could pass or cross the Sirat without any hurdle. If you can do so, that's Eid for you. So the very first Eid, a day when you don't commit any sin. The second Eid for believers, which according to the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the day when you leave this dunya and you didn't give your iman to shaitan, you didn't send your iman to shaitan, and you have left this dunya in the state of iman, that Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, that day is a Eid for you. Another Eid for you is the day when you could pass the Sirat, that bridge. Does anyone know about that bridge? Hassan, Sirat al-Mustaqim. Wait, you have to pass. Exactly. Imagine about when you have to cross that bridge, and if you can manage to do so, if you can manage to pass and cross that bridge easily, because that's your imtihan. The moment you fail, you're going to be in Jahannam. And our all ultimate to be in this dunya, to earn our destination in Jannah, inshallah. That's what we are here for. So many of us, we have misunderstood the reality of this dunya. We think this dunya is all about chasing dunya. So many of us, we think that this dunya is all about making money. No, it's not. Obviously, you have to make money in order to have a peaceful life, beautiful life. But that's not everything. This dunya is all about to manage to get your Jannah, inshallah ta'ala. So Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, another Eid for a believer, the day in which he can pass the Sirat, that bridge easily. Another Eid for the believer, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these all the things all related to your iman. You can never pass the bridge if you don't have an iman, or you didn't leave this dunya in the state of iman. Another thing, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the day in which the person can enter to Jannah, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and he can get rid of Jahannam. Allahu Akbar. Another Eid, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, another Eid for a believer is that when he can manage to go to Jannah, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala, because of his iman, and he can get rid of the Jahannam. That's another Eid for them. हम ईद की बात करते तो हमारे लिए सिर्फ छोटी ईद बड़ी ईद कहते हैं, लेकिन छोटी ईद बड़ी ईद ये एक ऐसा दिन होता है जहां मुसलमान सबसे ज्यादा जराइम करता है. We go to the movies, we listen to the musics, we dance, so many more things. Ikhtilatul mard azan, like mixed gatherings, so many more things. Imagine about, and one of the great Imam, he says, how stupid we are. He says, how stupid we are. We have spent the whole month pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the very next day what we are doing, we're pleasing shaitan. Allahu Akbar. After the pure mahine aapne mehnat ki, it's your time to get your result, it's your time to get your reward, and at that time what we are doing, we're pleasing shaitan and we're displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So under the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the day in which the person can enter to Jannah because of his iman, and he can get rid of Jahannam. And the last one, Allah's Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, the day in which the person can see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the tajalli of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As according to the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the greatest things after the day of judgment which is going to be given to the ummah of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to be able to see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the beauty of Allah is going to be shown to those who left this dunya in the state of iman. Those who made sure to preserve their iman. Those who made sure to increase their iman day and day, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And this is the result of their preserving iman in this dunya and akhirah. And that's the hadith of, that's why it's so important for all of us. Iman is the greatest ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of the things is going to work out for us if you don't have an Iman, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So make sure you have proper Iman. Make sure you have full belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu has mentioned for the youth, make sure who you hang out with. And Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked about friendship, who we should make our friend, or who we should be friend with. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says your friend is someone who reminds you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. लेकिन आज हमारे यहाँ ये चीज़ नहीं पसंद है लोगों को. अगर कोई बंदा ऐसा जो अल्लाह का जिक्र कराता रहे तो कहेंगे यार क्या हमेशा मौलाना बने रहते हो. That's what happens to our community, to our mahafil these days. उसको लोग निकाल देते हैं, कहते हैं कि बंदा जहाँ जाता है बोरिंग कर देता है, मामलात को खराब कर देता है और ये जहाँ जाता है मौलाना बना रहता है. Imagine about the thoughts we have these days and how much far we have gone to our deen, that somebody who reminds you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're turning him away from your mahfil, saying that tum maulana bane rehte ho. Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, if you really want to have friends, look for someone who can remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look for someone who can wake you up for fajr, not for someone who is going to make you miss your salah. Because if there is someone who is making you miss your salah, then he is not your friend, he is a shaitan. Because shaitan has come in the form of your friend and he is taking you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said the friendship is about akhirah. The friendship is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who can remind you about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's your friend, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. But if there is someone who is making you go away, turning you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah's Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, he is not your friend, he could be shaitan in the form of your friend. So these are some important thing about Iman, and these are some important aspects that we have learned, and some of the beautiful tips from the Quran and Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about the Iman. I would like to ask, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, if there is any question anyone wants to ask, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, regarding what we have learned today. And very soon we're going to have our new Youth Halaqa, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, with a new topic. So if there is anyone who wants to ask anything about today's khutbah, or about what we have learned today, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, they are more than welcome, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala. Is there anyone who wants to ask anything? Or everyone just wants to have pizza now, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala? Ahmad, come on, go ahead. If you ask one question, I will give you one more pizza. Come on. I think if we're done, we'll get up, inshallah tabarak wa ta'ala, and read salatu salam and dua, then we can, yes, Ibrahim?
Does that mean you can't be friends with a person that's not a Muslim?
No, it's not about, if somebody who is making you lose your Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can never be friends with them. Okay? Somebody who is making you miss your salah. For someone, there is someone, he says, don't worry about salah. Let's get on the match and we'll pray salah afterwards. And in order to please him, you have lost your salah, you have missed your salah, then you're not allowed to be friends with them. You're going to have one more slice of pizza, inshallah, because he asked the question, okay? Chale, inshallah, salatu salam pad lete hain. Mustafa jane rahmat mila ko salam sham'i bazmi hidayat bila ko salam sham'i bazmi hidayat bila ko salam hum gharibon ke aaqa pe behadud hum gharibon ke aaqa pe behadud hum faqiron ki sharbat bila ko salam Mustafa jane rahmat bila ko salam sham'i bazmi hidayat غوثي عزم إمام التقى والنقى غوثي عزم إمام التقى والنقى جلبعي شان قدرت بلا كن سلام مصطفى جاني رحمة بلا كن سلام شمعي
सलाम मुझसे खिदमत की खुद सी कहे हाँ रज़ा मुझसे खिदमत की खुद सी कहे हाँ रज़ा मुस्तफा जाने रहमत पिला को सलाम शम्अ बज़्म हिदायत पिला को सलाम الصلاة والسلام عليك يا رسول الله الصلاة والسلام عليك يا نور الله الصلاة والسلام عليك يا نور من نور الله وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا شفيعنا يوم الجزاء